بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي ونسلم على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. I have the mammoth task of discussing the story and the life of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu. I have a feeling that this is going to not be completed in the 3 hours or the time that we have. Bear in mind we have to discuss a life of 60 years, and if it was my life of 60 years where half of it's on YouTube or something like that, that's easier. The life of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, which is every moment is spent doing something, it makes it even more difficult. I advise all of you present today to make some sort of notes, something you can refer back to. I'll be giving a number of references, and my objective is to split the life of Umar radiallahu anhu into different phases. And so we're going to start with his life before Islam. Now, we start with his name and his family. Now again, when I read books on the companions, or I read books on seerah, many scholars, they take a lot of time into talking about dates and talking about, this person, the son of this person, the son of this person, and sometimes you lose kind of what's going on. And so I'm going to try and keep it simple. So these are things that you can make notes of and share your notes with me afterwards. His name was Umar, and he's the son of Khattab. That's why we call him Umar ibn al-Khattab. His lineage converges a few generations upwards with the lineage of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he was related to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. His grandfather was Nufail. Why is that interesting, and why do we care? Well, he was very important amongst the people of Quraysh, which was his community. So think about our kind of communities that we have, and each community has a certain name. It's a certain tribe. The Quraysh was the tribe of this specific group of individuals. And his grandfather Nufail, they would refer to him when they needed some judgment, when there were disagreements. His mother was the sister of Abu Jahl. We've all heard of Abu Jahl, a very famous, or rather infamous character within the Quraysh circles. And I'm mentioning this so that you can appreciate from his grandfather and from his mother that he was born in a home of immense nobility and influence. He was also referred to as Abu Hafs. That was one of the names that he was given, and he had the nickname of Al-Faruq. And Faruq is a title that we'll discuss. Where did he get this name from? Umar al-Faruq, as we know often, he got the name al-Faruq when he openly expressed his faith in Mecca. We'll come to that. So that's very briefly on him and his name and his family. And I'm trying to paint a picture slowly but surely. So the few things that I've mentioned so far, he comes from a very noble family. Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, very influential grandfather, and his mother is part of influential families. Secondly, let's briefly cover his date of birth and his appearance. So he was born in 583 AH. Now again, what does that even mean to many of us? 583 AH, we're not going to memorize this number. We're not going to walk around memorizing random numbers. So let's give some context. How about you think about it like this? He was born 12 years after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Which as soon as you hear that, you think, whoa, Umar radiallahu anhu, we always think as the same age as the Prophet ﷺ, but when you think he was born 12 years after the Prophet ﷺ, and by the way, this is what I feel, and this is what one of my objectives is when I teach these kind of classes, is to put things into perspective so that we can think about this. So he's born 12 years after the Prophet ﷺ, so the Prophet ﷺ is senior to him by 12 years. He was muscular, he was tall, what we would call hench, and he would prefer to keep his head balded. He was light-skinned, and he would grow the ends of his mustache, and he would twirl them on his fingers when he was in deep thought. So I'm trying to develop an image of this individual. He had the ends of his mustache were longer, and he would kind of twirl them when he was thinking. That's fine. Next discussion. Let's cover his relationship. So he had a total of 7 wives across his lifespan, a number of which he divorced, and it's worth mentioning here that Umar radiallahu anhu had a very interesting personality. He was extremely passionate about having children who would become a means of reward for him, and who would continue his legacy for him. And that's one of the fundamental reasons that he had a number of wives. It was also a cultural practice of the time, but his personality was such, he wasn't too interested in fostering a platonic relationship. And that was his personality. It's not everybody's preference, but and I can substantiate this with a comment of his. He would say, Ma'ati an-nisa lish-shahwa. I don't spend time with women because of my desire of them, وَلَوْلَا الْوَلَدْ مَا بِالْبَيْتِ أَلَّا أَرَى إِمْرَأَةً بِعَيْنِي. If it wasn't for children, I wouldn't really have much of an interest in women. That was his personality. That's just the way he was raised. Each person is different. You'll find prophets who talk, and companions who talk about their inclination towards women and their want for women. And you get companions who are more like, yeah, I'm not too interested in the platonic side of things. I just want children and that kind of thing. And so that was him. Different companions had different relationships. The Prophet ﷺ had a very different personality, and we find this in hadith. So Umar radiallahu anhu had a total of 13 children. 9 boys and 3 girls. 9 boys and 3 girls. And we're going to touch on some of his interactions with his children. You know, when we think of Umar radiallahu anhu, we think of this iron-fisted individual. We think of the khutbah that every Jum'ah we hear. We say, وَأَشَدُّهُمْ فِي أَمْرِ اللَّهِ Umar. The one who was most severe was Umar radiallahu anhu. But when you see his interactions in the home, I'll give you a bit of... I'll mention one of the incidents. So Imam Ahmad mentions an incident regarding Umar radiallahu anhu, that he was once sat in his home and one of his deputies came to visit. This is when he's Amirul Mu'mineen, he's the Caliph. One of the deputies comes to visit him, and when the deputy comes and sits in the presence of Umar radiallahu anhu in the home of Umar, the children are still running around and playing. And so the deputy says, Umar, what's this? When I enter the home, the children go quiet. When I enter the home, everybody kind of, shh, the guy's entered, dad's entered. They said, Umar, the kids are playing. So Umar radiallahu anhu says, what can I do if Allah has removed the rahmah and the compassion from your heart? And then Umar radiallahu anhu said, i'tazil ummalana. He actually took him and removed him from his deputies. Why? He said, if you cannot show shafqa and rahmah and compassion to your own family, how are you going to show shafqa to the ummah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Inside the home he was different. Outside the home he was different. In his job and his workplace and when he had responsibilities he was different. But when he was with his family he was a different character, and we'll look at that. That's what we kind of want to assess in our discussions. Now, sometimes in the duration of our discussions, if I find a tangent worth touching upon, I'll do so. I know we're eager to get into the life of Umar radiallahu anhu, but sometimes there's things that we can benefit from, which I'll focus on, because we want to leave with benefit. We're not here for the entertainment, we're here for the education and the benefit. So what's the first tangent? When Umar radiallahu anhu sent a marriage proposal to Kulthum, she is the daughter of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. So you've got Abu Bakr, his daughter is Kulthum, and Umar radiallahu anhu sends an invitation. Remember, Umar radiallahu anhu is younger than Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu is roughly the same age as the Prophet, and Umar is 12 years younger. And so he sends a wedding proposal to Kulthum. What does Kulthum say? She says, La hajata li fihi. I'm not interested in marrying Umar. So Aisha, who's the sister of Kulthum, because Aisha radiallahu anha is the daughter of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, so she's the sister. So she says to Kulthum, Atarghabina an Amir al-Mu'mineen? What, you're saying no to the Amir al-Mu'mineen? She said, Na'am innahu khashinul aish. He lives a rough life. He lives a difficult life. Meaning, I want a bit more luxury, I want a bit more this. I know what I'm getting into and I'm getting married. And she chose not to marry him. This is the leader of the believers, he's the current caliph at the time, yet this woman was still given the option to choose. She had the right to say no. So as Muslims, women were never forced to marry, not even the leader or the caliph. If you chose to marry him, you'd know the personality, you'd make that decision yourself. And the final tangent, which is connected here to his marriages, it's mentioned by Allama ibn al-Athir in his work Al-Kamil fi al-Tarikh, that when Umar radiallahu anhu married the daughter of Ali radiallahu anhu, he married the daughter of Ali, he gave her a dowry of 40,000 coins. That's no small amount. And so the tangent here is, leave these kind of decisions between the groom and the bride. Let them decide what dowry they want and what works for them based off their circumstances and their capability. Next discussion. Let's quickly look at his life, his education, and how he was raised. Because often you find the person that becomes the person they become is because of their youth and how they're raised. Often you'll find if somebody has some sort of trauma within their life, you can trace it back to something maybe that happened in childhood or something that happened as they were growing up. And so if we get an idea of the life of Umar as he's growing up, we can get an insight into Umar radiallahu anhu as an adult. He had learned how to read, which was a very rare skill within the community. He comes from a noble family, right? So they expected him to learn to read, and that wasn't very common in the Arab world. His father Al-Khattab, Umar ibn al-Khattab, his father Al-Khattab sent him to tend to and care for the animals and the camels at a young age. And his father was extremely harsh on him. And he would sometimes even beat him. And a number of scholars say that this left a lasting impact on the personality of Umar radiallahu anhu. Ibn Asakir, he narrates from Abdurrahman ibn Hatib, who says that كنت مع عمر بن الخطاب بضجنان. I was with Umar ibn al-Khattab at a place called Dajnan, and he said كنت أرعى للخطاب بهذا المكان. I used to take care of the camels for my father, for Khattab, in this place that we're in right now. فكان فظا غليظا. My father was very harsh. فكنت أرعى أحيانا. Sometimes I would take care of the animals. وأحتطب أحيانا. Sometimes I would gather the firewood. And Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions, who's again a great scholar of this ummah, Hajj Umar, فَلَمَّا كَانَ بِضَجْنَانَ. When Umar performed Hajj, and after he's returning from Hajj, he's at this same location of Dajnan, again he said, لا إله إلا الله العلي العظيم المعطي ما شاء لمن شاء. And he praised Allah and he said, who is Allah? He is the one who gives whoever He wants, whatever He wants. And how does he explain this? He says, كنت أرعى ابن الخطاب بهذا الوادي في مدرعة السوف. I used to take care of camels in this valley whilst I had woolen garments on. وكان فضا. My father was harsh, and then he says, يتعبني, and he would tire me. إذا عملت, when I used to work, I used to get extremely tired. ويضربني إذا قصرت, and if I was deficient, if I made a mistake, he would beat me. وقد أمسيت, and now look at this. Here I am. ليس بيني وبين الله أحد. There's nobody between me and Allah. Meaning, there's nobody I have to answer to besides Allah. And so we know that about Umar radiallahu anhu, and he also used to tend to the camel and the livestock of his aunts. Right? We find this in some of the books of hadith, etc., where he would be working and he would receive a handful of raisins or a handful of dates for the work that he would do. And he says, وَأَيُّ يَوْمٍ, what days those were? And he would think back at them. And Abdurrahman ibn Auf radiallahu anhu, he would say, يَا أمير المؤمنين ما زدت على أن قمأت نفسك عبت فقال ويحك يا ابن عوف إني خلوت. So what we're learning is, there was this harsh nature of his father, and that left an impression on his personality. But bear in mind, when you take care of animals and you take care of livestock, it also leaves an impression on your personality, the work that you do. People who are often, and in this day and age I say, those who work in like customer service, those who work for example, on front of house kind of thing, they often have a higher level of patience. I mean, they're dealing with me and you. When we go to a restaurant, we know how we behave and how we are. So people who are dealing with me and you, they'll develop patience. They want to say 101 things to you, but have that soft and caring approach. And Umar radiallahu anhu developed that from taking care of animals as well. Because think about it, when you're taking care of animals, there's certain animals, you can't beat them, you can't force them. What's the point of raising the animals? You want benefit from them, you want their meat to be good, you want their milk to be good. You put them under stress, they're not going to give you milk. You beat these animals, you're not going to get good meat out of them. And so Umar radiallahu anhu, and all farmers often, they have to have a soft and caring approach with these animals. Especially because they can't speak for themselves. You can't say, look, I just want you to do this. You can't communicate to them. And so it develops an integrity of character. It develops a mental toughness and strength. And of course, the time that he wasn't spending in his responsibilities of tending to livestock, he enjoyed horse riding, he enjoyed wrestling. And from an intellectual perspective, because he would read, he would also engage in narrating and listening to poetry. Not only that, but in the Arab world, there's a number of fairs that would take place, like annual events. And they were named things like Ukaz or Mijana or Dhil Majaz. And he would enjoy attending these events and these fairs. And whilst he was there, he would engage in trade. You have to understand the culture of those times is very different, right? When we go shopping, for example, when we go to buy clothes, you'll sometimes see this is the summer season stock or the winter season stock or the April. Where does this concept come from? Where does this seasonal concept of clothing come from? It actually comes from thousands and thousands of years ago, when you would have trade caravans that would come twice a year. A trade caravan would either come in the summer months or in the winter months. And that stock that would come, you would purchase, and that would be your kind of summer outfits. And there would be your winter outfits. And so you would buy your outfits like that. And so that's where this idea comes from. And so these fairs that are going around, they're going around, when they go to Mecca and Medina, they buy the local produce of Mecca and Medina. And when they go to a different area, they go to Syria or they go to the Levant, they will sell the produce of Mecca and Medina to them. And then when they're in Syria and Levant, they'll purchase that produce and bring it to Mecca and Medina and sell it there. So it's like the import-export that's taking place. And so Umar radiallahu anhu would love to go and spend time and hear the different cultures, and he would get to hear of Arabian history and Arab history. The prominent figures of the tribes, they would come together in the nights and they would sit around fires and they would discuss their history. Because that was the entertainment, right? Today we'll sit down and we'll watch Netflix, or we'll watch YouTube, or we'll watch something like this. For them, their entertainment were the same stories that we're watching on TV screens, but it was narrated. And by the way, that's one of the reasons the Arabs, and classically, they were extremely proficient with their speech. Because you didn't have cinematography, you didn't have sounds, you didn't have soundtracks in the background. Whatever you wanted to convey, you had to convey orally. And so you became really good at using your tongue. You became really good with language. You would find 10, 15, 30 different ways of saying the same word, but it means something different in each context. And so you got good at language like this. And so they would discuss their history. They would discuss the bravery of their heroes amongst their tribes. And Umar radiallahu anhu would also participate in the contests that would take place. And so as he is listening to these heroes, can you imagine how that impacts a youngster? That I want to follow in these footsteps. These are my people. These are the people that have done something. I want to be like them. So you can see that he's got the visionary that we'll see later on in Umar ibn al-Khattab. It's coming from him having role models. We have to provide role models. Tangent. We have to provide role models for our children. We have to make sure that they are aspirational, and to be aspirational, you need to give them somebody inspirational. And so they need to see individuals and have people in their lives, and they're looking up to thinking, I want to do that. I can do that. That's what I want to be, right? And so as he continues to get older, he's now taking a greater interest in business, in commerce, in trade. He's trying to get his money up, and he became well known as an affluent businessman in Mecca. Annually, he would make 2 business trips. During the summer season, he would head to Syria, and during the winter season, he would head to Yemen. And over time, people started coming to him, and he actually became the official spokesperson on behalf of the Quraysh. Now remember, why did I mention his grandfather? Because his grandfather was also doing something similar, right? His grandfather, the people would come to him within the community, Nufail, his grandfather, and they would ask him and communicate with him. And you can see over here, Umar ibn al-Khattab is now taking that role. And so the children often they will emulate their parents and their grandparents and the things that they see. If you give them enough interactions with them, and they look up to you as parents, as a father, as a mother, and I always say this, that there is a huge amount of emphasis given on the importance of a mother in a relationship, but there is just as much of importance needed for a father in a relationship. And there's really good articles that are written on this. And it's not to say, remember, this is the problem because of the kind of the YouTube culture, the TikTok culture that we live in. As soon as I say that there needs to be an emphasis on the fathers within a relationship, immediately there's somebody who's sat here thinking, oh, so mothers aren't important? And as soon as I say mothers are important in relationship, oh, the father's not important. I see, yeah? This guy's picking, it doesn't ever, both of them are important in different ways. They play different roles, right? But the point I'm making here is from Abu Bakr, from Umar radiallahu anhu's grandfather, we see that influence, right? And you'll find loads of articles on this, roughhousery and this and that and different things that the children need in the development of these children. And so, because his grandfather had this influence, people started coming to him as well, but also because of his affluence and him becoming quite influential in the community. And so people would come to him to resolve their disputes. Ibn Sa'ad mentions, إِنَّ عُمَرَ كَانَ يَقْضِي بَيْنَ الْعَرَبِ فِي خُصُومَاتِهِمْ قَبْلَ الْإِسْلَامِ. Even before Islam, Umar radiallahu anhu would be dealing with disputes amongst people. They'd come to him and say, Umar, we need you to deal with this dispute. Because he was somebody known to be fair and impartial. He then became the unofficial ambassador of the Quraysh. He was without doubt eloquent, well-spoken, persuasive, influential and respected. And because of that, he would speak on behalf of the Quraysh when they even required negotiations with people outside of their tribes. When other people would come and other people would want negotiations, they would put Umar ibn al-Khattab forward and say, you speak on our behalf. Along with that, this is important, he revered and respected the customs and the traditions of the Quraysh. This is very interesting because you're going to see this playing on later on. And remember, I'm going to be joining dots. I'm not here to give you a random set of events. I'm trying to show you all of the links within his youth that are going to impact later on. He revered and respected the customs and the traditions of the Quraysh. He upheld the acts of worship that they had and defended the Arab culture. Even before Islam, the Kaaba existed. Even before Islam, the Arabs of those neighboring areas would come towards the Kaaba and they would do tawaf of the Kaaba. They would walk around the Kaaba. And these things that we do in our Umrah, that existed even before Islam. And the polytheists, and Allah mentions it in the Quran, that their tawaf wasn't illa tasdiyah. They would just clap their hands and they would, different things that they would do, whistling and all of those kind of things. And so, because he had this respect and reverence and he looked up to these role models, it gives you an insight into why he was so opposed to Islam when it first arrived. We have to touch on that. Umar radiallahu anhu, one day is beefing with everybody and is hurting people and is persecuting people, and then suddenly he accepts Islam. What was the reason for his animosity? Remember, this is important to understand. If somebody hates you or somebody hates a community, if somebody hates Muslims, for example, Islamophobia or something like that, we don't justify that, but then we can discuss what's the reasoning for that hatred, what's the cause for that hatred. Because if you really want to tackle that issue, you've got to get to the root of what the issue is. Right? There's statistics that you'll find that if a non-Muslim knows a single Muslim, it reduces their chances of Islamophobia by 50%. Just by knowing another Muslim. And it doesn't even have to be somebody religious, because when somebody then will say to them, oh, Muslims do this, we're like, yeah, but I know a few Muslims who aren't like that. So immediately that kind of dispels the idea, right? And so he revered and respected the customs of the Quraysh. And so when Islam came, Umar radiallahu anhu was extremely opposed to it, because the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam first receives his prophethood at the age of 40. How old was Umar radiallahu anhu? Being 12 years younger, he was 27. 12, 13 years younger. He was 27. And so being this 27-year-old, he has all of this youth and passion and vigor, and he wants to become somebody. And so for him, Islam is this new ideology that's now going to shake up his system of life. The Kaaba is the home of the Arab pilgrimage. That's the source of their income. Who's going to come to the Arabs in Mecca? Well, what do they have? They don't have grass, and so they can't really produce much agriculture. It's not the best place for livestock and animals and all of these kind of things. They don't really have gold or oil or things like that we now have. And so why would you even go to the Arabs? And it's not like they were a superpower. It's not like they had anything exclusive that you'd want to go to the Arabs for. And so it was, the Kaaba was their source of income. The neighboring Arabs would all come. And by the way, the Kaaba was so fundamental for the Quraysh. It wasn't just their source of food, it was also their source of protection. Because listen to this. Imagine somebody from the Quraysh goes and he goes to travel. And he goes on a route. And on those routes you would have people who would ambush you and rob you. But if they knew they were from the Quraysh, they wouldn't rob them. You know why? Because they would say, if we rob the people of Quraysh and if we harm them, then when we come to the Kaaba, they won't allow us in. Because they controlled the monopoly of the Kaaba and who gets access. And so the Arabs, the people of Mecca and Quraysh, their whole honor and pride, their whole livelihood, their whole protection, everything. There's only two things you really need in life, right? You need safety, security, and you need the financial stability to survive. Those are the two things you need. You need a bit of money and you need to be safe. Those are the only two things. You need your food, you need your shelter, those kind of things, the basics, and you need to have security. And all of this is inshallah going to tie up with the fundraising that's going to take place, which I'll touch on a little later on. And so Umar radiallahu anhu, he's like, this is a big problem. And so you'll find the rich and influential men of Mecca, they started to see this new religion as a threat. That this is everything we've inherited from our forefathers, and you guys are trying to end this. And so it was a form of humiliation. And think about this. Imagine a legacy that your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents have started. You're the guy who comes along, and because of you, your inaction, they give you the business, the family business, and the whole family business goes to pot. You're the guy who let the entire family down. Your family has an entire legacy, and you're the person who ruins that legacy. So that's what Umar radiallahu anhu is thinking. And that gives us a very powerful insight as to why he was initially extremely opposed to the religion. The problem in their eyes were the weak and the vulnerable of the community who started accepting Islam. So they immediately took this opportunity to harass and persecute the weak, to bring them into line. And the scholars mention, وَلَقَدْ ضَلَّ يَضْرِبُ جَارِيَةً. Umar ibn al-Khattab himself, there was a young slave, and he would beat her. Why? Because Aslamat. And he beat her so much, حَتَّى عَيَتْ يَدَاهُ, his hands got tired. And then وَوَقَعَ الصَّوْتْ مِنْ يَدِهِ, he was whipping the individual until the whip fell from his hand. فَتَوَقَّفَ إِعْيَاء, he took a rest. وَمَرَّ أَبُو بَكْرَ, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu passed by. فَرَآهُ, and he saw this. يُعَذِّبُ الْجَارِيَةَ, that is punishing this young woman. فَاشْتَرَاهَا, he purchased this young woman from him. وَاعْتَقَهَا, and he freed her. And so this is Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu already started into his faith. But Umar radiallahu anhu isn't on that journey yet. And so that gives us a perspective into his life during Jahiliyyah. Now, that you'll find much more in the books, in the life of Umar radiallahu anhu. But I want to summarize his earlier life, and that's it. I want to point out some of these beneficial points which I've touched on, and I want to then focus more heavily on his life as a Muslim, because there's so much to cover. And so that's his life up until the death of our Prophet ﷺ. And sometimes I find that that's ignored. We want to get straight into his story of Islam, but I think knowing where the person comes from, you can kind of get an idea of the trajectory of where that person's going. And so that's phase one complete. That completes phase one of our discussions. We now want to look at phase two. What's phase two? Phase two is his journey to Islam. The first time he started taking notice of Islam was when some of the women of Quraysh started leaving Mecca. Some of the families of Quraysh started leaving Mecca. Mecca is their homeland. They've been living there for centuries, and now they're traveling to a distant land because they were facing persecution from the likes of Umar radiallahu anhu and others. And so we find reports in the Seerah of Ibn Hisham. Imam Ahmad, the great Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, he's also reported this in his Fadail al-Sahaba. قالت عبد الله بنت حنتمة. Abdullah bint Hantama, for those of you who haven't studied the companions, this is one of the female companions who was one of the earliest to travel to Abyssinia. Let me bring things to perspective. The companions are living in Mecca. The Prophet ﷺ comes with this religion in Mecca. The persecution begins in Mecca. Medina is out of the question at this stage. So where do they go from Mecca? They travel to Abyssinia, because there was a Christian king who was in Abyssinia, and he was very flexible with other religions and that kind of thing. And so they traveled to Abyssinia. And so Abdullah bint Hantama, she's one of the early people to travel to Habasha, and she was one of those. لما كنا نرتحل مهاجرين إلى الحبشة. So she's narrating. When we started traveling to Habasha, أقبل Umar came حتى وقف علي, and he stood over me. وكنا نلقي منه البلاء والأذى والغلظة علينا. We would experience difficulties and hardships and torment and persecution from Umar and his type. فقال لي, so Umar said to me, إنه الانطلاق يا Abdullah. Abdullah, he said, are you leaving? Is this your departure? قلت نعم. She said yes. والله لنخرجن في أرض الله عاديتمونا وقرهتمونا حتى يجعل الله لنا فرجا. Yes, I swear by Allah, we are leaving this land and we are seeking in the land of Allah. You have tormented us and persecuted us such that we are now looking for some sort of freedom, some sort of escape. فقال عمر صحبكم الله. May Allah be with you in your journey. ورأيت منه رقة لم أرها قط. Abdullah bint Hantama, she's narrating, she says, I, for the first time in my life, experienced and found some softness within Umar that I had never seen before. فلما جاء عامر بن ربيعة, when her husband came, who's Amir ibn Rabi'ah, وكان قد ذهب في بعض حاجته, and he'd come, وذكرت له ذلك, I narrated this to him. فقال كأنك قد طمعت في إسلام عمر. It seems as though you have hope that Umar is going to accept Islam. When she narrated this to Amir ibn Hantama, Amir ibn Rabi'ah, Abdullah says, he says to her, it seems as though you think he's going to accept Islam. قلت له نعم. She said, yeah, I think so. فقال إنه لا يسلم حتى يسلم حمار الخطاب. He will not accept Islam until the donkeys of Umar ibn al-Khattab will accept Islam before Umar will accept Islam. Meaning it was impossible that you would see Umar ibn al-Khattab accepting Islam. They just didn't believe it. And remember, Umar radiallahu anhu was somebody who appreciated noble qualities. He appreciates, you know, when you see somebody of worth, when you see somebody of, for example, intellect, you see somebody of potential, people of potential appreciate people of potential. And so Umar radiallahu anhu, he's starting to realize these people aren't troublemakers. These guys aren't just causing trouble, because if you're willing to abandon your home and you're willing to relocate to a random piece of land, then there's something going on deeper here. These guys aren't just here to cause trouble. They want to take their faith with them. And so around the same time that this incident occurs between Umar and Abdullah bint Hantama, there's a dua that the Prophet ﷺ made, which you'll find in the Sunan of Imam Tirmidhi. Imam Tirmidhi mentions a hadith from Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, the son of Umar, and the Messenger ﷺ said, Allahumma a'izz al-Islam. O Allah, grant strength to Islam بِأَحَبِّ هَذَيْنِ الرَّجُلَيْنِ إِلَيْكَ, with one of these two individuals whom you love, either Abu Jahl or Umar ibn al-Khattab. So the Prophet ﷺ around this time has made this dua, that Allah grant Islam strength through either Abu Jahl or through Umar ibn al-Khattab. And so the scholars mention that it was this sympathy within the heart of Umar, combined with the dua of the Prophet ﷺ, which led to the guidance of Umar. I will give you some advice here as a tangent for myself and yourself. There are people's du'as that we'll take in our life, such as our parents, such as individuals who live amongst us. And I always advise parents first, taking their du'as alongside your effort on yourself. These two make the perfect recipe for success. Absolutely fundamental. Don't lose the opportunity to take the du'as of your parents whilst you have that opportunity. If you've lost that opportunity, continue doing good in their name. Continue giving charity in their name. And along with that, find those individuals who are close to Allah, the friends of Allah, scholars, students. Spend time in their company. And those who are vulnerable within society, and support them. Getting their du'as will change your life. And again, it ties in with the fund. I'll be honest with you, I didn't know the fundraising was on Palestine, and I wish I had been told this in advance, because there's a lot I want to say, and inshallah I will be touching on some of the key things on Palestine. But it's a hadith of Bukhari, and I'm going off on a tangent, but there's a hadith of Bukhari that the Prophet ﷺ mentions, إِنَّمَا تُنْصَرُونَ, the only reason you as a people, as a community, as individuals are assisted is because of your assistance to the du'afaikum, those who are weak amongst you. Amongst the ummah there are individuals that are weak, whether widows, whether orphans, whether people who have different people struggling, whether they've been incarcerated or put in prisons for false reasons, or accused of this, or countless things. Somebody who's lost a family member, whatever. Du'as from these individuals and the du'a that comes from their heart, take it. That's a tangent. And so these are events taking place behind the scenes. So let's bring the events back to the life of Umar radiallahu anhu. And now let's follow his story and journey, which is narrated by Ibn Hisham. He says, كانت قريش قد اجتمعت. The Quraysh got together. This Umar is causing problems. So they got together. And فتشاورت في أمر النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. They said, what are we going to do about this Muhammad? فقالوا أي رجل يقتل محمد. Which of you is brave enough to kill Muhammad? Why are they discussing this? Why don't they just do it? Remember, the Prophet ﷺ belongs to the tribe of the Quraysh. If you kill an individual of the Quraysh, you are not warring with Muhammad. You are warring with that family, with that lineage. So this is why everyone's hesitant. You're thinking, well, somebody could have just stopped him on the road, or this or that, or something. It doesn't work like that. Because as soon as you get found out that you were the individual, that entire family, that tribe will go against you. And so you have to be very careful about this. فقال عمر بن الخطاب, Umar stands, أنا لها, I'm the man for the job. فقالوا, they said, أنت لها يا Umar, you're the man. فخرج في الهاجرة, so midday he sets out, في يوم شديد الحر, extremely hot day, متوشحا سيفا, and he has his sword in his hand. In the Arab culture, you'd have your sword at home, or you'd have it swinging on the side, but you wouldn't carry it in your hand. You'd carry it in your hand if you're going to wage war with somebody, right? Like, you don't leave the house with your boxing gloves. You leave him in the gym. So he's left with the boxing gloves. So you're thinking, you're going to see when Umar, you're leaving with boxing gloves. You've got a sword in your hand. And so he said, Yuridu Rasulullah, he was intending to go and kill the Messenger of Allah and the companions. And amongst those companions he was intending Abu Bakr, Ali, Hamza and other companions, fi rijalin min al-Muslimin. And so وقد ذكروا له أنهم اجتمعوا في دار الأرقم في أسفل الصفا. The mount, when we go for Umrah, you have the mountain of Safa and you have the mountain of Marwa, and you do the Safa Marwa, you do the walking 7 times. So the place where the companions and the Prophet ﷺ would give da'wah and quietly kind of have their little circles was at the foot of this mountain of Safa in a place called Darul Arqam. So that's where, so when you're at Safa, when you go for Umrah the next time, inshallah, Allah take us all again and again. When you're at Safa, think about that this is where Darul Arqam took place. This is where the early Muslims were. And so he goes to, he's going to that spot. On the way he meets Nu'aym ibn Abdullah. And he says, أين تريد يا عمر? Umar, where are you going? You've got your boxing gloves, where are you going? أريد هذا الصابئ الذي فرق أمر قريش. I'm going and I intend to kill this person who's left our faith and it's causing problems amongst the Quraysh. وعاب دينها. He has insulted our religion. وسب آلهتها. He has insulted our gods. فأقتله. I'm going to kill him. قال له نعيم لبئس الممشى مشيت يا عمر. Umar, what is this? You can't do this. والله غرتك نفسك من نفسك ففرطت وأردت هلكة بني عدي. You're going to become the means of destruction for Banu Adi. Who's Banu Adi? Banu Adi is his tribe. So the Quraysh is one. The Prophet ﷺ's tribe was known as Banu Abd Manaf. Banu Abd Manaf. And the tribe of Umar radiallahu anhu was known as Banu Adi. So he's saying, you're going to cause the end of your tribe, Banu Adi. Atara Bani Abd Manaf tarikika. You think the Prophet's tribe, you think the Banu Abd Manaf are going to leave you and your tribe alone? تمشي على الأرض وقد قتلت محمدا فتحاور. So they started arguing. حتى علت أصواتهما, until their voices raised. And Umar said, at one point Umar got angry and said, إني لأظنك قد صبوت. It seems that you've left your religion as well. ولو أعلم ذلك, if that's the case, لبدأت بك. Let me begin with you first. Forget Muhammad, let me start with you. فلما رأى النحام realized this ain't working. He's tried to convince him. And this is negotiations, by the way. You learn a lesson on negotiations. When you go into negotiations, you want to stop this individual from attacking Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But you won't say, you can't kill Muhammad. You'll make it personal. You'll say, but if you do that, what will happen to you? What will happen to your family? What are the consequences of your actions? When business people are trying to sell something, and you're saying, why don't you buy this product? But if you don't buy this product, imagine how difficult, imagine how easy your life will become. Imagine you walking around and everybody's looking at you like, wow. So that's negotiations. You have to convince somebody. So that didn't work. If that didn't work now, he needs to take a different tactic. So then he immediately blurts out, فَإِنِّي أُخْبِرُكَ أَنَّ أَهْلَكَ وَأَهْلَ خَتَنِكَ قَدْ أَسْلَمُوا. Do you not know that your own family, your own brother-in-law has accepted Islam? They've abandoned you. وَمَا أَنْتَ عَلَيْهِ مِنْ ضَلَالَةٍ فَلَمَّا سَمِعَ. As soon as he hears this, Umar says, وَأَيُّهُمْ? Who from my family? قال, he says, خَتَنَكَ وَابْنُ عَمِّكَ. Your paternal cousin, وَأُخْتُكَ. So Imam Ahmad continues the story. He says, لَمَّا سَمِعَ Umar hears this, and his sister and her husband have accepted Islam. His anger again, it kind of changed direction, it changed course. وَذَهَبَ إِلَيْهِمْ. So he went to them. فَلَمَّا قَرَعَ الْبَابِ, he banged the door. قَالُوا مَنْ هَذَا? And so they said, who is it? قَالَ ابْنُ الْخَطَّابِ. When you're angry and you're trying to show honor, in the Arab culture you don't say Umar. You say the son of Khattab, meaning I'm the son of my father. I've come with that pride. وَكَانُوا يَقْرَؤُونَ كِتَابًا فِي أَيْدِيهِمْ. They had a little sheet in their hand, and they were reading the Quran. فَلَمَّا سَمِعُوا حِسَّ When they hear Umar, قَامُوا مُبَادِرِينَ. They hurry. فَاخْتَبَأُوا. They tried to hide. Now in this room there were three individuals. One was the sister of Umar radiallahu anhu. One was the husband of that sister. And one was an individual who was teaching them the Quran. So the person teaching Quran, he hid. And the other two remained, but they forgot to hide the sheet, the document that they were reading. فَلَمَّا دَخَلَ وَرَأَتْهُ أُخْتُهُ عَرَفَتِ الشَّرْ فِي وَجْهِهِ. When the sister opened the door, when they opened the door, they entered. The sister saw that he was angry, and you can tell that he's not happy. So فَخَبَأَتِ الصَّحِيفَةَ تَحْتَ فَخِذِهَا. She took this sheet of paper and hid it under her leg. She kind of sat on it to hide it. قال ما هذه الحينمة والصوت الخفي التي سمعته عندكم. Umar says, what's the muttering and the sounds that I heard before I entered? It didn't sound like you were speaking. It didn't sound like poetry. It sounded like you were humming something. What was that humming sound? And they were in reality reciting طه. فقال, so they both, husband and wife, said, ما عدا حديثا تحدثانه بيننا. We're just talking amongst ourselves. قال فلعلكما قد سبوتما. Is it true that you've left your faith? فقال له ختنه. The husband said, أرأيت يا عمر إن كان الحق في غير دينك. Umar, have you even considered, what if the correct religion was in a religion other than yours? فوثب عمر على ختنه سعيد. Umar radiallahu anhu jumped on his brother-in-law Sa'id. وبطش بلحيته. He grabs him by the beard. He sat over. فتواثب. They both wrestling amongst each other. وكان عمر قويا. Umar is strong. We know he's built. فضرب به سعيد الأرض. And he brings Sa'id down to the ground. ووطأه وطأ ثم جلس على صدره. He's now sat on his chest. and he's beating him. فَجَاءَتْ أُخْتُهُ, his sister comes. فَدَفَعَتْهُ عَنْ زَوْجِهَا, she's trying to pull Umar off her husband. فَنَفَحَ, Umar shoves her, and very forcefully. فَدَمِي وَجْهَ, and so he hits her face. فَقَالَتْ وَهِيَ غَضْبَةٌ, and she says that this was his anger. When she mentions it, that was his anger. And so in her anger she says, Ya adu Allah, O enemy of Allah, atadribuni ala an uwahidu Allah, are you beating me on the fact that I say Allah is one? Umar says, of course. قلت ما كنت فاعلا فافعل, do what you want. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمدا رسول الله, I testify there is none worthy of worship besides Allah, and Muhammad is a messenger of Allah. لقد أسلمنا على رغم أنفك, we have accepted Islam even if it burns you. فلما سمع Umar hears this. And Umar again, he appreciates and he recognizes noble qualities when he sees them. Standing for something you believe in is one of the most noble qualities that you have. And every time I say a statement, I keep being reminded of the Palestinians, and standing for something that you believe in is the most noble thing that a person can do. فَلَمَّا سَمِعَ عُمَرْ, when Umar radiallahu anhu hears this, nadima, he starts, immediately he becomes regretful. And he sees that he's made his sister bleed, and immediately that regret comes over him. He hears what she said, and regret comes over him. And so he steps off the husband. فَقَعَدَ, he sits to the side, and he says, أَعْتُونِ هَذِهِ الصَّحِيفَةَ الَّتِي عِنْدَكُمْ, give me whatever document you guys were reading. فَأَقْرَأَهَا, I want to read it. فَأَقْرَأُهَا. فَقَالَتْ أُخْتُهُ, his sister said, لَا أَفْعَلْ, no. He says, وَيْحَكْ, listen to me. قَدْ وَقَعَ فِي قَلْبِ مَا قُلْتُ, I feel like I want to find out what this is. It's pierced my heart. I just want to give it a chance. فَأَعْطِينِي, give it to me. أَنْظُرْ إِلَيْهَا, I promise you. وَأُعْطِيكَ مِنَ الْمَوَاثِقِ, I promise you I'm not going to do anything. Give it to me. لَا أَخُونُكَ حَتَّى تَحْرِزِيهَا, if you want you can take it back at any point. I'm not going to betray you. So she, and remember, brothers and sisters, they can have that kind of, if you're thinking Umar radiallahu anhu, you'd be scared. You'll find the brother who's outside of the streets like all big and this, but the sister can speak to him like, in a very firm voice, and you got to take it, especially if it's a senior sister. So she says, إِنَّكَ رِجْسٌ, you need to purify yourself first. لَا يَمَسُّهُ إِلَّا الْمُطَهَّرُونَ, you need to make wudu. فَقُمْ, go and make ghusl or wudu, and then come back, wash yourself. So Umar leaves, he makes the ghusl, he comes back to his sister. And again, this is smart as well, from a perspective of touching the mushaf. But also Umar radiallahu anhu goes, and as you imagine now, we just think he went in ghusl, but she's diffused the situation. He's going to go, as he's walking, he's going to be thinking, as he showers, bathes, he's going to be thinking, he's going to come back in a refined, refreshed state, and he's going to be in a complete different perspective. He's come humble to the text. And that's one of the objectives of making wudu before you perform salah, by the way. That one thing is performing salah is an act of humility, we know that. But wudu forces you to show the highest act of humility. Why? What's the hardest part of salah? It's really not the salah, it's the wudu. Really the hardest part is the wudu. I say this to my students. The salah is easy, you can find a corner, quickly perform 2 rakats, 4 rakats, that's not difficult. Wudu is the hard part, and the hardest part of wudu is washing the feet. For women it's slightly different, it might be the makeup, so it might be the face. For the men nowadays as well, to be honest. But the hardest part either is the feet. And then you're at some airport and you take your socks off and lift your feet into the sink, and some guy walks past looking at you like, this guy doesn't have a shower at home, he's showering here or something, and you're there making your wudu, and then you now have to wait for your feet to dry because you're not going to put your socks on when they're wet, and then the hardest part is wudu. But what wudu does for a believer is it humbles them, and it's that mental preparation. When sometimes you're going into a boxing fight or something like that, it's that mental fortitude that you need to have. It's saying you can do this, you have somebody speaking to you and getting you ready, and then you go in. When you're coming to salah, when you're coming to the Quran, when you're coming to the mushaf, it's that mental preparation that Allah is giving you. Make wudu, it's hard, it's not easy, but if you can humble yourself with that wudu, you're going to get somewhere with your salah. And so Umar radiallahu anhu, so think about that, Umar radiallahu anhu's return. If somebody comes to you and there's a situation and you diffuse it first. Look, I know we need to make this decision. Take 10 minutes. Why don't you go drink some water, wash your face, and then come back and let's discuss this properly. Don't make decisions in that in that moment. And this goes through everything. Try and apply this to your life. I say to men often as well, because we often get taught about marriage, but we don't get taught often about divorce. You don't give divorce in the moment. Divorce isn't something that you do just like that. You don't get married like that. You didn't just wake up one morning, I'm marrying, that's it, married, done. No. You don't do divorce like that. You're in an argument, you don't get divorced like that. You say, look, I need to think about this. You take 2-3 days. You think about what this relationship gives you. You think about gratitude. You think about all the good things that you're getting out of this. You think about the 80-20 principle. That, okay, maybe I don't have 20% that I want, but I've got 80%. Maybe there's gratitude here. Maybe I'll consult with family members. Maybe I'll speak to this person. Maybe I'll speak to somebody, and then I'll make that decision. And that's why in the Sharia, you don't you don't make hasty decisions. And then if you do make the decision, you've got to bring the entire family together, have some consultation. Is it working? Is it not working? How's it going to work? You have to think these things through. But I said to you, if there's tangents, I'll mention them. So Umar radiallahu anhu comes, and it's Surah Taha. Now often what do people do when they get to this part? They say, he recited the verses and he accepted Islam. But I want us to recite the verses with him. Let's find out what verses he recited, and let's think from Umar's perspective, because now we've seen everything Umar has done. We know his life. We have an insight into this individual. We know what kind of a person he is. So we know he loves the Quraysh. So let's see what he might have been thinking. So he starts and he recites Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. And when he recites Rahman and Ar-Rahim, ذعر, he panicked. فألقى الصحيفة من يده, he dropped the document. He dropped the sheet of paper. ثم رجع إلى نفسه, he pulled himself together and then he took it again. Why did he panic in this instance? Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim were terms that weren't used for their gods previously. And the first introduction of his God, this new God that has come for them, this Allah, is the loving, the compassionate, the caring. That was something which really shook him. And so then he recites the first verses, Taha. It's similar to Alif Lam Mim. What does Taha mean? So the scholars mentioned, we actually don't know. But then the Quran has to have objective. It can't, Allah didn't just randomly put things there without objective. The objective is to humble you. You don't know the meaning of these two letters, Taha. So humble yourself. There's a lot of things you don't know. And so now you're coming into this Quran with humility. مَا أَنزَلْنَا عَلَيْكَ الْقُرْآنَ لِتَشْقَى. Allah is speaking to the Prophet ﷺ. But Umar is reading this as though it's addressing him. Umar, we didn't reveal this Quran. وَمَا أَنزَلْنَا عَلَيْكَ الْقُرْآنَ. We didn't reveal this Quran to you لِتَشْقَى, to cause you distress. You think we reveal it to cause you distress? And Umar is thinking in his head, this Quran causes me so much distress. It's caused me so many problems. Allah is saying, we didn't reveal it to cause you distress. إِلَّا تَذْكِرَةً لِمَنْ يَخْشَى. In actual fact, we sent it as a reminder for those who fear Allah. We sent it as a reminder. We're trying to remind you of something. There's something, O Umar, that is intrinsic within your biology that you've forgotten. And we're just trying to remind you of that reality. There's a study that was done by Oxford. I'm not talking Oxford, meaning the University of Oxford. You can find it. If you go on Google, type in University of Oxford study on belief in God, intrinsic belief in God. They did a study and it was like multi-million project and it was done over a number of countries. They wanted to find out whether belief in God, a higher power, a superpower, is intrinsic. It's something that you inherently believe. Not that you're born into a Muslim family and your parents teach you Islam. They wanted to know whether belief in a God and belief in an afterlife, those were the two metrics that they were studying. You can easily find it. When I mention research papers like this, at least make a note of them and go and Google them. And after the break in the Q&A, you can mention some questions. And the conclusions of that study were intrinsically, we have biologically within our structural makeup in our DNA, we just have this within us. We have this inclination towards believing in a higher power and believing in an afterlife. Which I find so, like subhanAllah, like you intrinsically have that within you. We're not talking about arguments for proofs of God. We're not talking about intellectual arguments. We're talking about a biological argument. Allah talks about the Quran as tadhkirah, as a reminder. And I'm thinking to myself, what do you mean reminder? How is it a reminder for Umar? It's the first time he's hearing it. Because there's a biological calling within you. And that's kind of where there's a huge tangent. تَنْزِيلًا مِمَّنْ خَلَقَ الْأَرْضَ وَالسَّمَاوَاتِ الْعُلَى. It is a revelation from the one who created the earth and the heavens. السَّمَاوَاتِ الْعُلَى, the heavens, the above you. Umar radiallahu anhu is now thinking about the world around him. Who created this earth? That's the first question you ask. How did this earth end up here? It can't have just appeared. خلق الأرض والسماوات, these things that are here, where did it come from? الرحمن على العرش استوى. It talks about Allah, the Lord of mercy, the one who established the throne. له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض وما بينهما وما تحت الثرى. Everything in the heavens and everything on the earth, everything in between them, everything beneath the soil belongs to Him. All of this belongs to Allah. وَإِن تَجْهَرْ بِالْقَوْلِ Umar, O Prophet, if you say something out loud, Allah knows. فَإِنَّهُ يَعْلَمُ السِّرَّ وَأَخْفَى. He knows the secret. He knows that which you conceal. Allah, and that is Allah. لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا هُ. There is no God but Him. لَهُ الْأَسْمَاءُ الْحُسْنَى. Exclusively for Him belongs the beautiful names. Umar radiallahu anhu is reading this, and as he's reading these verses, he says, مِنْ هَذَا فَرَّتْ قُرَيْشٍ. Is this what the Quraysh are running from? And then he read another 6 verses, and I've been given some time, so I will conclude here now. But as Umar radiallahu anhu reads these verses, Umar radiallahu anhu is coming to this point where now the faith is he's feeling this inclination towards the faith. And remind me when I come back after the break to touch on a very important point of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullah alayh, which he mentions in his fatwa. Do not forget. If I forget to mention it, when I sit down, shout it out. Okay? If I don't start with, let's touch on that point of Allama ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullah alayh. And Umar radiallahu anhu, after hearing this, he accepts Islam, but we'll cover that after the break, inshallah. We're going to have a Q&A, we're going to cover. And like I said to you, I want to cover in detail, but to give you as much benefit as I can as well, so that we can take some stuff away from this and actually benefit in this regard. And so I'm going to be handing over in a few seconds. But just before I